We all struggle with life's temptations, whether it's small temptations such as grabbing a late night snack when you know you shouldn't, to larger temptations with potentially legal and moral consequences behind them. On the latest episode of the Press Rewind Prince Lyrics podcast, Erica Thompson and I will be talking about the lyrics to Temptation and discussing a bit about the temptations that Prince possibly was struggling with to curb at this time, primarily temptations of the flesh. Welcome back to the show, Erica.
Thank you so much for having me, and I really enjoyed that introduction.
Thank you. I think the Temptation in some ways fits nicely with the niche of songs that you've helped me cover on the show thus far. Songs like Sexuality, Let's Pretend We're Married, I Would Die For You. They all have, a spiritual and religious angle to them, but the big difference is, at least what I see between those songs and Temptation is that they tend to code their intentions much more cleverly using, sex and love as metaphors, or at least as entry points into the tangled sacred and profane theme that's common in a lot of Prince's early work. Temptation seems to be much more naked, no pun intended, in its intentions, I think. It's not as coded. It's not, you don't have to dig very deep to really kind of get the gist of what Prince is saying in this song. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, you have a whole conversation with God at the end of the song. So you can't get more blatant than that, I don't think. But it's really a continuation of what we saw with Purple Rain, especially in the live shows. And I think the cool thing about this song is a lot of, he does pull a lot from that dialogue that he was having on stage with God during the Purple Rain tour. And I think that it's telling that he, according to research, PrinceVault.com, Dwayne Tudall's book, the band worked through this song at a sound check on December 6, 1984 at Richfield Coliseum in Richfield, Ohio, which I think is pretty cool, Jason, since you're in Cleveland, I'm in Columbus, so that's kind of like between us. But then he later added the God dialogue later that month, immediately following a show on the Purple Rain tour. And so as we go along, I'll pick out some of the phrases that he carried over from that dialogue on the Purple Rain tour. But it's just really a continuation of that love versus lust, good versus evil. And at this time, he'd really built his career on this sexual image, and people kind of expected him to be explicit. And I think that was something that he was grappling with at that time, and I think it comes through in this song.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. And just going back to the Richfield Coliseum comment, I also noted that because I thought it was also very, it was just a kind of, a happy accident that the two of us living in Ohio now talking about a song that he has a live version, like you said, a full band version. I would love to hear it. I'm really hopeful that any future Around the World in a Day deluxe releases would include that recording if it still exists. I'm hoping it still does, 'cause I think it would be really cool to hear the full band performing this song. My understanding and from reading it, it sounds like it's I don't know if it's faster or if it just has a more organic feel to it. The version that we get on the album almost sounds like two songs in a way. And as you alluded to, that later, the version that we end up getting with the discussion with God that was seemingly fleshed out for the concert, and as Prince was grappling with his, I don't know if it was guilt or whatever he was feeling, having such a sexual image, but then how does that correlate to his religion and his religious beliefs, and really struggling with that and working some of that out on stage in front of thousands and thousands of people each night is really kind of cool, that he felt like that was important enough to add to this song to close out this album, something that seemingly was meant for just a live performance. I really enjoy that as well. And the Richfield Coliseum sadly is closed now. It's been closed for a few decades, since 94, so not quite 30 years, but creeping up on that, and it's been bulldozed. And I don't know if it was replaced by another music venue, but it doesn't exist anymore. So Temptation is the last song. The final thoughts and the final expression that Prince had for this album it's a very religious one, with the latter preceding it and then following it with Temptation. But you don't necessarily get that impression just from listening to like the first half of the song. If you just listen to the first half of the song, you might think this is just another kind of semi-raunchy Prince exploration into sex and expressing, his horny toad side, because that's what a lot of the lyrics are leading into the discussion with God. So I'm kind of interested to hear a version of the song without that, to see where he was going with it and what his thoughts were about that song, or that version of the song that we never actually got.
Yeah, and I think, like you pointing out that it follows the latter. The official Prince podcast right now, they're doing episodes on Sign the Times, but Susan Rogers, the engineer, she said something that I think can be applied to this song or this album, and really a lot of his albums. Is she said she noticed he would often like follow a song that was really lustful. Like he would record a song that was really lustful and then record a song that was like where he was asking for redemption, and she felt like he felt guilty about something. So I think that's really apropos for Temptation following the latter. And it also reminds me of Darling Nikki, because it's like, Darling Nikki is a really raunchy song, but he puts that message about the Lord coming soon at the end of it, almost like he needs to like repent or something. And I kind of look at this the same way with this conversation with God at the end.
Yeah. And what kind of cool thing about this is what 1 year's difference makes in terms of Prince's comfort level with expressing a very much more blatant religious views, is that ending of Darling Nikki is backwards. So it's really, unless you are able to decode that, unless you're able to play that backwards in 1984, you would never know that it was a message about the Lord. But a year later, Around the World in a Day, he's not coding this stuff anymore. This, as we just already mentioned, this is a conversation with God. It is not hidden. It is not a metaphor. It's right there in front of us. The lyrics are right there in front of us to understand that feeling he was having towards the sacred, profane, and how he was going to reconcile that within himself. Because what he is what he is. You can't change who he is, but you get the sense that at times he feels like he needs to repent. He needs to change. He needs to make a change in his life, and which is very obvious in that conversation with God. So, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but I really like the fact that within just 1 year, he felt the freedom, I guess, the personal freedom, the creative freedom, to put them out there in a way that he didn't have to worry about what people thought or think that he was being too religious. He already had his enormous smash with Purple Rain. Now he could maybe get a little more overt with his messages.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so the version we get on the album is a primarily solo version, very different from the full band version that was recorded, as we already talked about, while the band was on tour for Purple Rain. The only exception would be saxophone, played by Eddie M., who was noted for being a member of Sheila E.'s touring band at the time. So Eddie M. was around because Sheila E. and her band were opening for Prince and the Revolution on the Purple Rain tour, so it makes sense that Prince would have borrowed him, so to speak, for saxophone inclusion on this track. And there's other songs that were recorded around this time. The I Would Die For You extended version that was recorded also while rehearsing for Purple Rain tour has Eddie M on sax as well. So it's one of those things where a lot of people just assume, early to mid 80s saxophone must be Eric Leeds, right? No, not at this time, not quite yet, at least. Okay, so as I mentioned, the song starts off. The lyrics are very sexual. The Prince's delivery is very animated. It's all over the board. It almost sounds a little bit like we've interrupted him in the middle of some sort of masturbatory session. Not to be too graphic, but I mean, that's kind of what it sounds like to me. If you're really trying to picture or imagine, he's really worked up. He has like this really worked up singing voice that goes in different registers, and he adds a lot of what I call vocal gymnastics to his singing voice in this song. Do you have any other comments about that? Do you feel like it's kind of like the way he sings matches the lyrics in a way?
I think so. I didn't really think about him being in the midst of something, so thank you for giving me that vision.
Oh, anytime. Anytime.
But yeah, I agree. And I think he has some of the best screams on this song and in his career too. Just really, when I was listening again to prepare for this podcast, I was like, I really appreciate the effort he put into these screams. But yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's really bluesy sounding. It's not boring whatsoever. This song, I feel, is fairly, I don't want to say controversial, but it's kind of polarizing, I think. A lot of people love it for good reason, but when I also think of, or when I've talked to people about this album, there's the universally loved songs like Raspberry Beret. Everybody loves that. Everybody loves Pop Life. Most people really enjoy even like The Ladder or Paisley Park. But Temptation seems to have a much more significant portion of Prince fans that either love it or hate it, or just think it's just too out there. And when I say too out there, I'm really more referring to the coda, the discussion with God, which we've talked about many times, but we haven't gotten to it yet. We don't want to, get ahead of ourselves with it, but it's hard to talk about this song without talking about how it ends with the discussion with God, because that really makes the song would be memorable. I don't want to take anything away from the rest of the song. It's very memorable without the discussion with God, but that's what we're left with, and that's how the album ends. So it's going to be something that it's like it leaves the impression, the lasting impression, when the music fades out and all we're left with is silence, is that final kind of section of this song that Prince talks to God about, the error and seeing the error of his ways. So I don't know. I mean, do you see this song being fairly polarizing for fans, or are you, or has your experience been different? Has your experience been most people really enjoy this song?
Well, that makes sense to me. I guess I would love to talk to more fans about this song, but I can certainly see where you're coming from, because sonically it's so different from the rest of the album. It kind of sticks out. And so I have a friend who really loves this song. But for me though, I sometimes skip this song. Like, I feel like I have to be in a certain mood to listen to this album start to finish. And if I'm not in that mood, then I'm just going to hit certain tracks. And those for me are Paisley Park and Tambourine, America, and then maybe Pop Life if I'm not listening on my headphones and have to hear that echo with the vocals. But that's it. And I love Condition of the Heart. And I appreciate The Ladder but I can't, I pick and choose, and I skip Temptation. And it's really odd because when I listen to it, I'm like, this, this is a good song. Like, I love, like, there's like that layer of 1950s like rock and roll, but then like with blues and R&B, he's just doing so many things sonically. And I love the guitar. The guitar solo is incredible, and his guitar opening is incredible. So it's like, yeah, this song is great, but it's just not one that I return to a lot. So I can kind of see how that might be polarizing. But yeah, I always love to talk to people who were experiencing these songs in real time and as they were coming out, because I'm a little bit younger. But I do kind of wonder what most people are saying about that God section. Like, I know you were really young when this album came out, but
Right.
do you have any memories of engaging this song?
Yeah, this song was also one that would skip sometimes. It's long. I mean, that in some ways, now I don't care. I love long Prince songs, but that can be a detriment for some people. This is like an 8.5 minute song, give or take, because of how it ends. Like the first section, I don't want to say the normal section. The first section wraps up in a pretty standard length, 4 to 5 minutes, but then you've got 3 minutes, give or take, that, because I think the discussion seems to drag a little bit. Like, I personally, I think Prince probably could have done that talk to God section a little quicker, and wrapped up his thoughts a little faster to make a more concise output. But yeah, I mean, I get it now. But if I remember when I was a kid, though, I would listen to it, and as the song started to slow down and the conversation with God came on, I would then oftentimes turn it off.
Yeah.
It just didn't have enough to keep my interest. I wasn't fascinated by Prince's forays into religion, because a lot of the stuff that was being sung about on Purple Rain went over my head at the time. So it almost seemed like, geez, he's turned into like this really religious fanatic, and being a kid, it wasn't something that appealed to me. So yeah, I kind of tuned the song out after its original or initial burst of guitar.
Yeah.
All right. So I think what we'll do now is go through the lyrics, but I did want to comment. I thought it was kind of interesting. So for the second time on this album, Prince starts the song, or has a kind of like a chant or a mantra. So it's not the beginning of America, but at some point in America, I think it's maybe midway, he says, freedom, love, joy, and peace. And in my conversation with Zach Hoskins on America, it kind of felt like that was those words were like his buzzwords or his mantra for the song. Like, these are the words. If you're going to force me to summarize this song in soundbite words, that's what I'm going to say. But with Temptation, he starts the song off by saying sex, temptation, lust, and that gives us, as the listener, immediately we know what the song is going to be about with that. And to go along with kind of like the guitar that he adds to punctuate each line, it really is it just provides a very interesting opening and grabs your attention, grabs the listener's attention. At least it grabs my attention. I don't know if, when you hear those lines, I assume you think the same thing, like, oh, we're in for quite a ride.
Yeah, I agree. And I like that comparison to America too. I guess you could have added repent maybe as another word after that, because that's what he's going to do at the end. But yeah, that sets it up nicely.
Yeah, for sure. Everybody on this earth has got a vice. In mine, little darling, mine is the opposite of vice. Mine is the running hot water of the daughter of morality. In other words, this little prince thinks a lot about you, see? Baby, 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 I'm guilty in the first degree. All right, so with the first verse, I think he's really kind of expressing a lot of what his lustful desires, and getting back into what I mentioned with the opening intro with the sex, temptation, and lust. Why is he saying those words? Well, because he's got a vice. He's basically telling us as the listener something we already know. You know, I mean, if we've been paying attention to his music up to this point, nothing he's saying here would be that shocking or be, all that surprising, I guess. He's claiming he's got a vice. It's the opposite of vice. So, opposite of vice is just a kind of a poetic way of saying he's, running hot. And you could say by running hot meaning always horny, I don't know.
Yeah.
There's lots of ways you could basically say the same thing. And of course, Prince never takes or rarely takes the easy way out when describing things in his lyrics because he likes to be more creative, more poetic, as I mentioned. What's some other lines here in this first verse that you really see as interesting, Erica?
Yeah, well, Darter of Morality, I've spent a lot of time, thinking about, well, what does he mean? And, I mean, with Prince, you kind of just never know what inspires him, what he has made up, what he's pulling from. So I can't really say exactly what that means. I mean, with me, I just started thinking biblically, and I was just like, oh, could that be Eve? Darter of Morality, Eve. And if you think about, the theme of temptation and just really trying to get that across. Eve is the ultimate temptress, unfortunately, because she gives the apple to Adam to eat. Right. So that kind of is the image that was conjured up for me with that. And then the other line is, I'm guilty in the first degree. And I mean, it's common to just say I'm guilty of this, whatever this might be that you're talking about. But I mean, I think guilt reminds me of sin. I mean, because it's the sin of the flesh that he's struggling with. And it actually reminded me of another song of his, Electric Chair, from the Batman album, because he sings, if a man is considered guilty for what goes on in his mind, then give me the electric chair for all my future crimes. So again, it's he's guilty about these fleshly desires. And I think that ties back to the Bible, Matthew 5:28, which says, everyone who looks at a woman with a lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So I think, that's kind of a common thing that Prince is working out in his lyrics about some of the desires. He might not necessarily be acting on them, but just thinking about them, according to biblical doctrine is a sin.
Yeah, good point, because he's really talking about thinking when he says this little prince, which he's done it a few times before where he refers to himself by name instead of just saying, I think a lot about you. This little prince thinks a lot about you. So he's just not really admitting to anything that we would consider in this day and age, or even in the 80s, as all that egregious. It's just he's maybe just preoccupied with matters of sex. Or preoccupied with the opposite sex. And so he's admitting that, and he's claiming to be guilty of that. And as I mentioned, this really isn't something that's unusual or surprising for anybody who's been listening to Prince. So at this point, he's just telling us something we know already to kind of set up, I think, the entire rest of the song. You got this guy who happens to be me. We're singing about in the first person, who really likes to sing about. I think about sex a lot. I sing about sex a lot. That's my persona that I've put out there. The image that he had been presenting to us as Prince, the musician, from songs like "When We're Dancing Close and Slow" all the way up to "Darling Nikki." There's a lot of sex in between there, and it's been a big focus of his success in his career. So he's admitting that to us and telling us thusly in this verse. That's kind of what I'm basically getting.
Yeah.
So then the chorus is fairly simple. It's just 4 lines. He says, temptation, working my body with a hot flash of animal lust. Temptation, all my fingers in the pool of splashing musk. So the chorus, once again, referring to lust, he brings lust up again. So lust is something that, was mentioned before with sex, temptation, and lust. So hot flash of animal lust. Heat, again, is an another word that he continues to use, the opposite of ice, heat, hot flash, of animal lust. So it's really just what I'm just getting from the chorus is continuing that narrative of what this song is about and where he's going with his guilt and why he's feeling guilty later on. The fingers in the pool of splashing musk is an interesting line for sure, I would say. Kind of like the daughter of morality, where you just kind of like, I'm not sure 100% what he's talking about, but it's definitely an interesting phrase.
Yeah. Well, I want to spend a little bit of time on animal lust.
Okay.
I think, Prince is like, I don't want to say obsessed, but he's very interested in like bringing up animals when he's talking about sex. But like animal lust is a phrase that's also important to him. So he talks about it in his memoir actually. And I was really excited that he used that phrase because I know he used it in the song Temptation, but like in his memoir, when he spends a lot of time talking about like his first girlfriends growing up. And so I'm just going to read a passage. So he's talking about Carrie. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right, but he says, Carrie was the first girl to expose a brother to straight up animal lust, where rational thought is overcome by the strength of physical attraction. This feeling will draw words from the pen that one doesn't even know exist. This feeling will make one combine words that don't go together, but just sound so good, you not only read them, you can smell them. So I think we are, and then the last line that I want to read, once a writer has actually experienced something for oneself, then they can better tell others about it. So I think that's like perfect for this song, especially about words going together that don't normally go together with some of his, creative phrasing here. But I just, he really liked the phrase animal lust. And I think, I think you and Zach may have even discussed this on this podcast, but it's like, if you think about when doves cry and when he says animals strike curious poses, they feel the heat. In Raspberry Beret, he talks about the horses wonder who you are when he's having that lovemaking scene, which he brings up lovemaking in a barn, like that comes up, whether it's we're watching it in Purple Rain or whether it's in Raspberry Beret. So I just thought that was really funny, and that stood out to me as just a phrase that he loved to use to describe sex.
Well, and also, good point, because it also kind of fits in with the phrase splashing musk.
Yeah.
Because musk, it's not a word that is used a lot, but when it is, it's meant to really refer to kind of like pheromones or an odor that males would give off in order to attract the opposite sex, whether that's in the animal kingdom or if it happens to occur for Homo sapiens. It's a really primal, the way I understand the word at least. It's really kind of a primal, and it's not something that we can control unless you consider musk. 'Cause I think of musk as a natural odor, not artificial odor like a cologne or a perfume or something like that. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know for a fact. But when I think of musk, I'm thinking of something that is more natural and inherent to that person or that animal. And so he's really kind of breaking this down. I feel like he's breaking his animal lust down to its barest essentials and almost looking at us as human beings as just extension of the animal kingdom that has these urges and that can't sometimes be controlled, and that's where the animal lust comes in. And also talking about fingers in the pool of splashing musk. The phrasing is a little, I wouldn't say odd, but it's certainly not easy to necessarily parse through and understand exactly what he's saying there. But I think just using the word musk goes along with animals in many ways.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm glad you brought up pheromones because, of course, he has a song called Pheromone in the 90s on the Come album. But yeah, and I think we could probably use our imagination to think about acts that he's talking about with his fingers, but I'm not gonna I'm not gonna go into that.
Right. I mean, I didn't have anything written down specifically, but I was gonna like, okay, well, if the conversation naturally went there, I would agree. But yeah, listeners, use your imagination. I think you can probably figure it out.
Yeah.
So then we move on to the next verse. And this is where he kind of throws it back at us. So, he's in the first verse, he says everybody's got a vice, but he really kind of focuses the verse on talking about himself. In the second verse, he says, everybody in this room has got an urge. What's yours, baby? Mine's temptation. It rains at a party where lovers splurge. Pop go mama when daddy gets a little too much. You know what I'm talking about? Purple electricity whenever our bodies touch. Oh, baby, I love it when our bodies touch. And as I alluded to earlier in the show, the way he sings these lines, it's just so animated and it's so interesting. It's not even in the course of a verse, he'll change up his vocal inflections and change up how he sings the song, maybe more casually to extremely manic, and starts to scream some of these lines, like the last line, I love it when our bodies touch. He has like this really kind of high-pitched scream that it's like almost like frantic that he's singing it, like he can't control himself. But in verse 2, we've got another reference. We've already got a reference to lust, and now we've got a reference to temptation again in the title of the song. So what in verse 2 are you kind of seeing, or where are you pulling out of this second verse, Erica?
Yeah, well, I think it's pretty straightforward, but like you said, the way he's singing it, I would love to have been able to watch him record this. I mean, of course, that probably not, no one was allowed to watch it, but I wish I could be a fly on the wall. But I just really like the line, where lovers splurge. Mine is temptation, talking about urges. It rains at a party where lovers splurge. I think that's just like a really poetic way to describe just being infatuated and I guess being overcome by lust, because when I use the word splurge, I'm probably talking about a shopping spree or something. So I love that he's using that word here. It's very creative to me. Also, I always get excited when I come across a word he's made up, like purple electricity. When I do my Prince blog, I always try to like pull out a lyric, in my title of my blog entry that week, and I'm oftentimes scrambling for something. So purple electricity, I could apply that to anything that I want. So I'm just excited to come across that word. But yeah, other than that, just the lover's splurge, I think that's the part that really got to me in this verse.
Yeah, lover's splurge and purple electricity are very interesting words and phrases coming out of this verse. So I definitely agree with that. And then something else that I just kind of get out of this, or a couple things that I get out of this verse, I almost get the sense like, with lines like, what's yours, baby? You know what I'm talking about? He's almost like talking to somebody now. And I don't think like talking to a greater audience, it almost feels like he's talking to somebody specific. And, I mean, a lot of people listen to music and can imagine themselves being on the recipient of a particularly romantic song, or a song that really speaks to them, that seems like they want to believe the singer is singing it to them. And I think that because the song is thus far so sexual in nature and so kind of drawing towards eroticism, that by adding lines like that, you almost feel like Prince is trying to really hone in on the listener to make it seem like he's talking to us specifically. And it's almost like he's having a conversation / confession, confessing to somebody, like he has like this big dark secret that he's trying to confess. Everybody's got an urge, baby. What's yours? Mine's temptation. maybe fishing for confirmation that the person feels the same way, maybe has the same vice. And if that's true, well, then we're on the same page. Maybe we can go take care of this vice together. And,
Yeah.
and, I just kind of, it's not creepy, but it kind of comes across to me at times like he's admitting this information to whomever he's talking to, with the intent and the hope that it goes somewhere as a result of that confession.
Yeah, I think that's a good interpretation. It's very intimate, and again, it reminds me of kind of what he was doing on tour with Purple Rain. Even though there are tons of people in the audience, but he would address the audience like, "You want to take a bath," and all the people would just scream in the audience. But yeah, he was doing a lot of that type of interaction and pulling people in, certainly.
Mm-hmm. And then the other thing I wanted to mention here is just also going back to the party where lovers splurge. To use the word party, I immediately think of, so when he's admitting that he has temptation that reigns at a party where lovers splurge, I just think of some of these more hedonistic parties, like you think of, I don't have a lot of imagery that I can point to, but certainly within literature, and there's probably examples of that in even more ancient literature about hedonistic parties occurring where really the intent was just to gather human beings for sexual purposes, and anything goes, in that kind of party. Lovers splurge tells me a little bit that's, or at least gives me the impression that might be the kind of party he's referring to. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know, but that's what I get out of that a little bit.
Yeah, especially since he's addressing, everybody in this room, everyone gathered here. So I think that's a reading for sure.
Good point. So then he goes back to the chorus after the second verse, and it's the same. It's the same lines: working my body with a hot flash of animal lust, temptation, all my fingers in a pool of splashing musk. At this point in the song, the music is still propelling forward. He's got the guitar stabs in there, guitar solo. He doesn't say a lot of new lines here. It's just more of like saying the same lines in more unique ways until we get to kind of like this breakdown where the music sort of just, fades out. And then we just get, I don't know if it's like a drum machine beat at the background, just kind of propelling forward. And the guitar's gone, and it's kind of quiet. So now we're just listening to Prince talk. And this is a spoken breakdown. It's a spoken interlude. So the lines at this point now are temptation. I'm not talking about just ordinary temptation, people. I'm talking about the kind of temptation that'll make you do things. Oh, temptation. Oh, darling, I can almost taste the wetness between your temptation. I'm not talking about any old kind of temptation. And he finally admits, I'm talking about sexual temptation. A lover. I need a lover. I want you. I want you in the worst way. So, I didn't say every single line because I think, you just have to listen to it to kind of get it. But essentially, these are the lines he's saying up to this point before his conversation with God, where he's really continuing to admit. I feel like he's just admitting once again he is really struggling with this sexual temptation that he's referring to, and when he finally says, "I'm talking about sexual temptation," he says the word sexual or sex for the first time in the song, although everything leading up to that is about sex, generally speaking. Yeah. So it's once again, it's not really a shock when he says it. That's what he's been talking about, the kind of temptation he's been referring to. He makes it seem like it's this big secret he's letting us in on, when it's one of the worst kept secrets of the song. I don't know. This section, it just kind of, it's like right in the middle, and it's before the conversation with God, but it's after all kind of the interesting musical parts of it. It kind of bridges the two portions of the song, I guess, would be the best way I could describe it.
Yeah, it's really like a confessional, and this is the section that is kind of pulled from some of his dialogue on stage during the Purple Rain tour. So I wrote that down. Like, during some of his shows, he'd be talking to the audience, and he would say, "Mama, you better make up your mind, 'cause I got a bad case of temptation. I'm
Mm.
not talking about any old kind of temptation, y'all. I'm talking about sexual temptation." So he's really emphasizing like the sexual sin, because there are all types of temptation. But I mean, like you said, it's pretty obvious, but I think he's just emphasizing how how he's overcome with lust, and how great of a sin that is. So I think I just see it as like reinforcing that, but like you said, I don't think it adds much to the song before we get into his dialogue with God.
I think it probably worked better as the interlude, or how it was conveyed in the concerts, because he doesn't add this. He doesn't have this added while he's performing Temptation, the song. It's kind of almost comes out of nowhere. If you're like sitting in the audience at the Purple Rain concert during the tour, you get this section of his show, and you don't know what to expect. You don't know where he's going with this. And then for him to say, really emphasize, I'm talking about sexual temptation. That's, if you've seen any of those concerts or heard of them, that's, the crowd goes, I wouldn't say wild, but they certainly hoot and holler a bit, because anytime Prince brings up the conversation about sex, everybody gets all excited because they know that's it's interesting, it's exciting. This is a lot of people like Prince at that time because of his really more explicit and sexual songs. They dig it, and so I see that working a bit better in the context of the Purple Rain tour than it does here. It's more shocking. It's more surprising. Like I say, you don't know where he's going with this. You don't know he's about to have a conversation with God. You don't know that's where this is leading to. So it just seems like he's admitting and confessing, as we mentioned already, to this, this sort of sin that at least, internally he is struggling with. And it's almost like it's driven him a bit mad. Like he can't even finish sentences because he's so obsessed and driven mad by his lust. I can almost taste the wetness between your, and then he trails off. I mean, part of that's just to prevent from being overly explicit, sure, but it also, if you think of it, like I'm so consumed by this thought that I can't even focus enough to finish a sentence.
Yeah.
That's kind of like almost a little bit of what I get from listening to this song in that, using that frame of mind. I need a lover. I need a lover. He keeps repeating himself. Like he's, I don't know, like he's just, blabbing on and on over this to try to appeal to somebody or appeal to the powers that be to give him what he wants. So anyway, I just think it's cool for that, and I do like how it was integrated into the concerts preceding the Around the World in a Day release, as it sits here in the recorded version of the song. It's not as impactful for me personally, but others may think it's great, and that's fine.
Yeah, and I think, just to add, I think it's important to Prince because not everybody is going to go, not everybody was able to go to that tour. And I think and I think this happens throughout his whole career. He feels really strongly about getting messages across to folks. And so it's like, what better way to put it on this record where more people can access it. And I think a lot of musicians talk about this, just the power that they realize they have over their audiences, especially like when they're performing live and they can feel their energy. And, some of them, not everybody, but some of them are really mindful, I guess, about what messages that they're putting out there. And so I guess if you're somebody who is religious or spiritually minded, or, has a guilty conscience, or has like a certain morality that can kind of get to you, like Prince, like, okay, I'm putting out all of these sexual messages, but I need to like put out something greater to to people too. So I think that might have been what he was struggling with as well. Like I just have to put out like a higher message too. So that's why I'm gonna add this like a couple weeks later. I'm gonna make sure I add this dialogue on here because I've got to get this other message out.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that totally makes sense. He knew he had a platform. His success thus far had provided that. And it's probably, if one was to speculate, I'm sure that was a big part of it. Knowing that he had this enormous platform and he had all of these people's ears, what is he going to do with that? Is he going to use it for good, for bad? And maybe a little bit of both, and trying to balance that out, and how to balance out a song like Tambourine with a song like Temptation, possibly. So.
Yeah.
Okay, so then after that, we are treated to his conversation with God. Of course, God is played by Prince. It's just how it's delivered is it's a lower register to differentiate between the two voices. Stereotypical God voice, like loud, booming, low. Oh, silly man, that's not how it works. You have to wander for the right reasons. And Prince says, I do. You don't. Now die. And so then at that point, Prince screams, no, no, as you imagine that he is being killed or dragged down to hell, whatever you want to imagine how this is going down. Let me go, let me go. I'm sorry. I'll be good. This time I promise. Love is more important than sex. Now I understand. I have to go now. I don't know when I'll return. Goodbye. And so that ends the song. That's how not just the song ends, but the entire album ends with him saying, I don't know when I'll return. Goodbye. It's really kind of, I wouldn't say spooky, but it certainly adds a level of gravity to those statements when you think about some of the things that Prince was putting out there at the time. He was, at least in the few interviews he'd done, the sound bites that he had been providing, he was kind of feeling like touring, he was over it. The Purple Rain tour wore him down. I think he was, I don't remember how long, if he even said, but around this time, I'm pretty certain that he had been declaring retiring from touring, at least for a while.
Yeah, you're right. I think he was putting out there 3 years. Of course, he didn't, abide by that. But yeah, I think he was telling people, I'm taking a break for a long time.
Yeah, and if an artist at the top of their popularity says, I'm going to take a break, as a listener, I remember listening to this and thinking, I wonder if this means he's going to go away for a while. Like, he just needed to step away. Prince couldn't really do that. He just didn't have it in him to truly step away in the way that, artists today, like, I enjoy music from Fiona Apple. She's an artist. I've enjoyed her music for decades. But, I mean, she'll take 6, 7, 8, 9 years between albums.
Yeah.
And that's not that unusual. There's plenty of artists that take a long time. Prince just couldn't do it. And so I remember hearing these lines and thinking, is he retiring? Is this it? Is he just, did the Purple Rain success get to him to the point where he just felt like he was done with the music industry? I didn't really know how to take this line. I mean, in the context of how it's being sung here with this conversation with God, I don't know if it makes the whole, I don't know when I'll return, I don't know how to take that, because if he's being killed because God says, you don't understand this, you don't get it, you have to die, you don't necessarily return when you die unless you're being resurrected somehow. So I don't really know how to take that. So I'm going to let you tell me your thoughts on this outro.
Sure. Yeah, I have a lot to say.
Yeah.
But Prince is saying, he's just like, he needs a lover. He wants you. He wants this person in the worst way. And God says, that's not how it works. You have to wonder for the right reasons. So what are the right reasons? And it's just that it goes back to that love versus lust theme from Purple Rain. And like in the liner notes, around the Computer Blues song, and actually on the tour, the robotic voice says this, because on tour, not only is Prince having monologues and talking to God, like there's a robotic voice talking back to him, but it's poor lonely computer, it's time you learned love and lust. They both have 4 letters, but they are entirely different words. So, that's going on in Purple Rain, and it's carried over here. So it's like, you can have a sexual connection and relationship with someone, but it has to be based in love. And if you want to take a step further, biblically, then it would have to be within marriage. But Prince is trying to learn the lesson of like, I can have this sexual relationship, but there has to be a deeper connection. And so, God is recognizing that that's not what's happening in this song here. And, that's what he's communicating to him. And it's funny because it's like, Prince is like, I do. And God is like, you don't, now die. And it's like, well, that escalated quickly. Like,
right?
I know.
God's not interested in having a conversation with Prince like this. He's like, no, dude, you don't get it.
Right. And the part about death is, it kind of, again, goes back to the Bible. It's, to pull out a verse, Romans 6:23, the wages of sin is death. So it's like, you can sin, but if you don't repent for your sin, which is through Jesus, belief in Jesus Christ, you will die. Like, you will not go to heaven. And so I think that's what he's trying to get across with that. And so it kind of almost seems like, it's very theatrical with Prince, like you said, either being killed or going to hell or whatever. But it almost, I think of it as like a warning, like, okay, you don't now die. And it's like, no, like, Prince is realizing, no, this is serious. I don't want to die. So I'm going to change. Mm-hmm. So this is why he says, I'm sorry, I'll be good. This time I promise. Love is more important than sex. And that's even in the liner notes in Around the World in a Day by this song. It says, temptation is useless. Love is more important than sex. And he would have these conversations on the Purple Rain tour. Like, I always quote time and time again, Prince is telling the audience, I know I said be good, but they dig it when I'm bad. And again, it's that, I think he's communicating that expectation that he's built up. Like, the audience expects him to be nasty and explicit. And it's like, well, I might not necessarily want to do that anymore, but this is what they expect. This is why, part of why I'm famous. So I kind of have to give the audience what they want. And I think he was, arguably struggling with that at the time. And so, when he says, now I understand, I have to go now, I don't know when I'll return, goodbye. And I think he's playing on a lot of different things, which is kind of brilliant. Like you said, I think he's, teasing people to say that he might really take a break. And I guess only Prince can answer this. I don't know, at one point he might have been serious about taking a break. On the other hand, he might have just been teasing his audience and building that anticipation for them. But I think it's a death of a couple things. It's like, if you think about the way his sound is changing, it's like it's a certain Prince is dying in a way. And he's, going through a new rebirth in terms of what he's going to be doing sonically now with the Around the World in a Day album, but then with Parade and Sign of the Times and so on and so on. He's not going to be making a lot of records that sound like Purple Rain. So I think that's one aspect. The other aspect is, I think, a kind of spiritual rebirth too. And I think we noticed this on record. It's like, up to this point, we've had a lot of songs about sexual freedom and lust, and not necessarily tied to love. So if you go, way back to the Dirty Mind album, or if you in Uptown, or if you go to Sexuality on Controversy, and then as you get into 1999 with Let's Pretend We're Married, you have all of these songs that aren't necessarily talking about being in love with someone. But then after, Purple Rain, then we start to get songs like Adore and When Two Are in Love. And, he's still kind of talking about love making, but it's about being committed to one person and being in love with one person. And then, of course, you have him getting more and more explicit about his Christianity, especially on the Love Sexy album with songs like I Know and Anesthesia. So I think it's a death and a rebirth in different ways here that he's talking about.
Yeah, that's really insightful, because also as you were talking, it made me think the whole fact of the matter that is that he wrote this and recorded this song prior and in the middle of the Purple Rain tour. So you can't think of it as a reaction necessarily to being done with fame, or at least done with touring. Like when an album comes out after a tour, people tend to think like everything must have been written, logically, chronologically after things were done with the last thing. But that's not how Prince operates. He had all this in the bag before Purple Rain tour even started. And much of it before the album was even released. So the whole of 1984, especially the second half, I do get the impression that he was, whether there was the religious side pulling him, and he really wanted to become more explicit in his religious beliefs and feeling the freedom to do that in his music and express that in his music. But as you've mentioned, I think a lot of it also has to do with the fact that he was feeling like being in a relationship is going to fulfill him, and having that committed relationship and sex in a committed relationship was what he desired. Maybe less of the casual sex, maybe less of the groupies or the parties and the stuff that occurs when you're young and famous, and really looking to settle down, whatever that meant to him at the time. And I truly believe he was sincere in that. And you made a very, very valid point with kind of the direction moving forward after Around the World in a Day. Prince was always going to be sexual, and he was always going to have sex integrated into his songs. I don't really feel like that was his problem with some of the things that he was putting out there. It just seemed a lot less like it was in the context of a committed relationship, or that there was any love involved whatsoever. I mean, you don't have to be married to be in a committed relationship, depending on your religious views at least. And if he's committed to somebody and he's in love with somebody, then the sex is going to be that much more eventful. It's going to be that much more memorable. It's going to be that much more. It's going to intertwine the individuals greater, so that they're become one. I really do appreciate you bringing that up. I think this is a turning point. At least that's what it was. I think that's what he was intending it to be, and that's just me, basing it off of what we received after Around the World in a Day, and taking these lines to flip it back. And I have to go away for a little bit to really find myself, but also my music has to kind of change, and I really like that. Thank you for adding that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I also want to add that, and this can be aspirational. Prince can be aspiring to certain things, but that doesn't mean that he's living up to them in his life. But that's just like all of us, right? Like we all have goals and things that we want, but we might fall short of them. And so I just felt like I had to say that for I can hear fans well, no, I heard that he was still, he still had a million girlfriends or whatever, right? But I think you can definitely say it's something that he's aspiring to, at least on record, and maybe feeling like he has to be more responsible in his messaging to encourage people to that end, even if he might be falling short himself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. He's a human being. So,
yeah,
he had a lot of opportunities, maybe more so than the average person. And as the song title suggests, temptation. It's tough, it's tough. A lot of people do not, will wilt in the face of really intense temptations. and it's not unique to Prince. Certainly, all human beings can relate to that, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, I don't really have anything more to say about the outro. It's very theatrical, as you mentioned. It's kind of funny in a way, though. The way Prince screams, "No, no!" The two different voices, and I don't mean funny like it's a comedy routine. There's obviously very serious intent behind the words, but the way it's delivered, and you have to kind of take it as face value. Prince is attempting this really kind of serious thing, but also putting it out there in a way that he knows has got to be also entertaining. At the end of the day, he's an entertainer, and he understands that. So there's got to be some entertainment to it, and it wraps up nicely. It's a very interesting and memorable way to finalize and put a bow on the end of this very interesting, creatively all over the board album that is Around the World in a Day. You kind of get the sense that he's going to take us on this journey with Around the World in a Day being the opening song, and by the time you finish listening to Temptation, you really feel like you've been on a journey. At least I do.
Yeah, it's an intense listen, this whole album, for sure.
So, Erica, do you have anything more to say about Temptation? Have we covered everything you have in your notes? I'm sure you have notes.
Oh, yeah. I think I've gotten through my 3 pages. So, yeah, I think I'm good. I appreciate this, Jason, the platform, the ability to talk through some of these things, because these things don't necessarily come up in everyday conversation about Prince. So it's really an honor to be able to go deep into this stuff.
Well, it's always an honor to have you on. I always appreciate your perspective and how you communicate your thoughts on the show. And you're a very talented writer. I'd like to let the listeners know where they can find your work.
Thank you. You can visit my website at apurpledayindecember.com. I talk a lot about Prince and spirituality, but there are some other things thrown in there as well. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Miss_E Thompson. So MISS_ETHOMPSON. And
you can find me at Press Rewind Pod on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And I just recently launched a Discord. So I would really greatly appreciate anybody who's listening to the show who's familiar with Discord, even if you're not familiar with Discord. It's a conversation app, a chat app, so to speak, where I've been able to recruit several of my podcast guests, Erica included, as well as a number of other people have joined the team here on Discord. And it's a place for all of us to conversate about Prince, talk about podcast episodes, talking about new music that is coming out all the time, thankfully. This is being recorded in September, so we're all anticipating the Sign of the Times Deluxe Edition coming out very soon. Eager to hear that, so I'm sure there'll be a lot of conversation around that, even though my podcast isn't quite up to Sign of the Times yet. It's unfortunate that I'm not there, but when I am, I'll be happy to talk to anybody about anything that we've done thus far, or even in the future. I just like talking about Prince, so hopefully others can join me on Discord so we can have that conversation amongst a bunch of people. That's the whole goal. It's a group conversation that we're having. So just look for that link to the Discord. I have it on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I'll put it in the show notes for this episode as it goes up. So look for me there as well. And I wanted to thank Eric Thompson again for joining me on the Press Rewind Prince Lyrics podcast. I've been your host, Jason Bredinger. And until next time, I don't know when I'll return. Goodbye.